The Marching Roundtable is proud to be an official media partner of Drum Corps International.
Thanks for coming to the Marching Roundtable YouTube channel, sharing great information to help you succeed in all the marching arts. While you're here, we hope you'll subscribe. Hi, this is Tim Hinton, the Beast of the Marching Arts and the host of the Marching Roundtable podcast. On this series, we talk with a private lesson teacher and performer for each instrument to tell you what you need to know to be more effective in working with those students. We hope you enjoy the series.
The old saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop, is very much in play when it comes to the percussion section. They sometimes get a little left out when it comes to some band literature. I think probably older band literature in general. Newer composers tend to be a lot more savvy about including more interesting and busy percussion parts, knowing that there are a lot of programs that might have several kids. I've had times when I've had a band of 40 or 50 winds, but 12 percussionists. So keeping them busy was always a challenge. So having that as a big, I'd say a chunk, a block, or however you do it with your lesson plan, I think is crucial. Of just, if you have a block of what you want to accomplish during a band class during the day, and then maybe a block underneath that, percussion. What are you doing specifically for percussion today? I've been playing percussion now for 43 years, and I still notice all kinds of things that I can continue to work on. Teaching helps to do that. Teaching helps me to understand that there's always more to learn, no matter how experienced you are, no matter where you think your own personal skill set is. There's always something to go back to and say, ooh, I'd really love to smooth out my rolls. I love to get my weaker hands stronger. I would love to be able to play in a more musical way when I play on the timpani, things like that. It's a never-ending process for any musician, and it's important that kids realize that early on.
This podcast is sponsored by FJM, Fred J. Miller Incorporated, found at fjminc.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Marching Roundtable podcast. This is Tim Hinton, the Beast of the Marching Arts. We're talking percussion today and have a real ringer on the line. Danny Lloyd is with us. Danny, how are you?
Great, Tim. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. So we are going to talk about percussion, and I appreciate you being our percussion guru today. So if you could introduce yourself, please.
Well, again, my name is Danny Lloyd. I'm Skyping, Zooming, whatever we're doing from Concord, North Carolina. Born and raised in this state, lived a few years in Florida, but then came back up here. And I've just been involved in, I think I knew I wanted to be a music teacher in high school, and, just had a lot of those formative experiences then, meeting great people and having great experiences, going to different music camps, governor's school, March of the Year Drum Corps, all those things. And I think I knew from a very early age it was going to be all about music.
Well, that's wonderful. And of course, you were there in the early days of Carolina Crown, which is very cool. We were talking about the fact that Dr. Mary White, is a great friend of mine, was also there at that time. So that's wonderful. And thank you for sharing your expertise. So you've been teaching percussion and music, of course, a very long time. So here's our concept, everybody. I'm an instructor, I'm a band director, I'm standing in front of an ensemble, probably a concert band, but any sort of ensemble of students, and there are percussionists standing back there. I'm like, okay, what, Danny, would you want me to know to be able to be most effective in working with those students? So where would you want to start?
Well, I would know that the old saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop, is very much in play when it comes to the percussion section. They sometimes get a little left out when it comes to some band literature. I think probably older band literature in general. Newer composers tend to be a lot more savvy about including more interesting and busy percussion parts, knowing that there are a lot of programs that might have several kids. I've had times when I've had a band of 40 or 50 winds, but 12 percussionists. So keeping them busy was always a challenge. So having that as a big, I'd say a chunk, a block, or however you do it with your lesson plan, I think is crucial. Of just, if you have a block of what you want to accomplish during a band class during the day, and then maybe a block underneath that, percussion. What are you doing specifically for percussion today? Maybe the literature you've chosen keeps them busy all the time, which is great. But if not, what do you do so that they're still learning, being active, and also just not causing trouble in the classroom?
Right. And I think percussionists get that a lot, but I do think you're right. I think a lot of times they're sitting around and they're not involved. And who wants to do that? We're in music class to want to perform and play and be involved in it. So I think that's a really good point. And I think that directors are becoming more savvy about this, about figuring out. Of course, if they aren't in the literature that's being a part of the literature that's being rehearsed, there are other things we can do also to keep them busy, right?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Since busy is the operative word here, the busier we keep them, the better class tends to run. Then having resources around for them to be able to utilize, such as maybe certain warm-ups or exercises, perhaps maybe short etudes on snare drum, or things that they can play quietly if you're having to do a focus on with winds during your rehearsal. And having them going over with them a procedure of, okay, I've got to focus with my brass today. They've got a really hard part in this piece. So you might be idle for it. Here's what I need you to be doing. And if you're lucky enough to maybe have an assistant, of course, then that's when you could do a sectional time with them in another room, perhaps. But if you're not, then keeping them busy with just simply air drumming. They can still move the hands. They can still satisfy that craving to noodle, as percussionists tend to do, and to be able to be involved with things that are going to make them feel that they're progressing, that maybe they're being challenged at an appropriate level. Okay, I don't have to play on these 80 measures of this piece. Maybe there's percussion ensemble literature they can be working on. Again, like I said before, plenty of etudes. There are lots of great resources out there. If you have a subscription on Make Music Cloud, formerly Smart Music, tons of resources out there for them just to be looking at and listening to. Things that just keep the brain and the hands moving and busy so that you're focused on what you want them to be focused on and not what they might want to focus on otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I thought it was really cool when I learned that there are these like big vinyl practice pads for like marimbas and things that you can actually, you can quietly practice your music and stuff. I think there's just really cool innovations out there that we can all take advantage of.
Yeah, lots of companies have come up with ways, because they've known for some time that that's been a need of music educators, is keeping the percussionist busy. If I can curve it back to literature again for just a moment, there's so many great old pieces that, frankly, as a percussionist, when I was in middle and high school, I didn't pay much attention to, that now I love. I love listening to Holst First and Second Suite. I love listening to Percy Granger. But they weren't percussion heavy. And frankly, back in high school, I didn't really care how pretty they were. I gained an appreciation for that later on. But if I hand them a part, one of my favorite things I love to do as a teacher is to hand a percussionist a part that has a nice, busy little part of them, and see their eyes just open up like, whoa, look at all these notes. They tend to really love the challenge. And they're the ones that want to take all that energy that they have and dive into something like that. And those things just inherently push them forward, make them really want to work for it. So the more you can find literature like that, and again, I think the last 20 or 30 years at least has seen a big growth in percussion usage in concert band literature. That'll really get them excited about that. Now you've got them on your side. Now, even if you have to say, hey, I need to take some time with the winds, can you work silently on whatever your way is? If it's air drumming, if it's on pads or some other silent way to play, they can go, okay, I'll be with you on that because I love this piece and I want it to sound great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's really important to think about your percussionist when you're choosing your literature. I think that's a great point to make, sort of a great place to start for this conversation. Okay, great. So what else would you like me to know?
I had another good friend of mine that I work with who does a really great thing at the beginning of the year. She will have chosen certain pieces for concert band, but then she'll do what she calls a listening party, where she'll leave a few opens and will just throw out suggestions and say, hey, let's listen to this piece of music. And she'll often pick things that they haven't done before. Like it's not like she would do this with a traditionally well-known piece like Korean folk songs or something like that. She would choose maybe a newer piece of music and have the kids listen to it and say, what do you think about this? Do you want to do this? That's another way to get them engaged and to buy in, so that if they make that choice on a piece, they go, okay, you chose this. This is something you want to get after. But most of the time you don't have to worry about that because they're in. They're already in with you and they're ready to go with that. Plus, it just, even if it's stuff you decide not to do, they're getting exposure to a lot of great literature anyway, even if it's not things that they can do. So by giving them a little bit of a play in the choice of literature, that helps with the buy-in, I think, as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I feel like that can be done in a number of different venues where you let them have a part in the process. Right? Even like stands tunes for football time or whatever, like let them sort of be a part of that. And any sort of ownership you can give students and some agency in making choices is always great for the buy-in, no question.
Yeah, I think that's key for really any section.
Agreed. I think that's a great idea for anybody in the band. But sometimes percussionists, I think they might need a little extra, so around that. So I'm glad that we're mentioning it in this conversation. All right. So I'm in front of the ensemble. What else do you want me to know?
So one thing you talked about earlier on was about technique too. Band directors who don't have a deep percussion background, they certainly understand what percussionists do and what you want it to sound like as a director. But then being able to teach them just the right technique to be able to use, just to how to make a triangle sound beautiful, or to how make a snare drum sound very musical. And getting the right tone out of it. I think there's value in using this great resource we call YouTube and pulling up some videos of well-known percussionists. A lot of companies have great technique videos on their website or have made series of videos like that. And you could have those pulled up and assign that maybe as an assignment for the percussionist and say, hey, tonight or for this week, I want you to go home and watch that video and then come back and tell me what you learned. And maybe even better, show me what you learned. Is there now a different way how to hold your sticks, how to hold your mallets? Make a long story short, I had an interesting experience with that myself. Even in college, I was preparing for my senior recital. And, as you do, you work hours and hours a day getting ready for that big moment. And I was developing really sore hands and joints around my fingers and wrists, elbows. And I went to my doctor and he said, yeah, you're developing carpal tunnel syndrome. And so I went back to my percussion professor, got him Dr. Rob Falvo, who was teaching at Appalachian State. He was a terrific teacher. And he took the time to rework my stroke and technique, things that probably just got passed by when I was first learning in middle school and high school, when I was just one of 80 kids in the room. And we redid my technique completely so that I was hitting the drum and hitting the marimba in a completely different way. It was life-changing for me, and I wish I had known that earlier. And so looking at the technique of a lot of other percussionists, like watching people like Evelyn Glennie play classical percussion, you'll learn a lot about just how she plays the instruments, not just what she's playing. And other people like that are absolutely worth the time to watch. And then to show your kids, look at how she's doing this. It could save them some pain and effort for later on, but it could also develop some more musical sounds out of your percussion section.
Yeah, of course, you want them to see it being done correctly. You want them to see examples and hear models of what it should sound like. And you're right, there's a lot of instruments and techniques in the world of percussion.
Sure.
And if I'm not a percussionist and I'm standing on the podium, I don't think I have to feel bad if I don't understand all of it. But your point is there are good resources that we can trust where your students can learn to make sure they're doing it correctly. I love the idea of giving them, again, that sort of that's their responsibility to watch that, learn that, work on that as a section. Your older members in the section, your section leaders or whoever, can certainly guide everybody through that, and gives them then the responsibility. So I love that there's, whatever it's calling for in the music, you can make sure that it's being played correctly through those resources.
And I love, Tim, that you just mentioned about older members. I think if you can, I'm a big fan of, if you have a large percussion section, and even on a busy percussion piece, there might be only 4, 5, 6 parts on it for 4, 5, 6 people. You can double those parts when you're learning the music. And you can say, okay, you 5 or 6, you're playing it for the concert, but I would like everybody else to pair up with each of those people and learn the part as well, maybe even trade off a little bit. And especially if you compare older ones with younger ones, like say if you have seniors and juniors that you compare with underclassmen, and say, try to learn this part, this snare drum part along with them, and watch what they do, and have them show them how do they play that rhythm, how do they play that technique. If it calls for a special type of stroke or sound on the instrument, that's a perfect way to let your leaders and your older students teach the younger ones without you having to worry about digging up all the extra stuff. A lot of times, if you're fortunate enough to have great leadership within your group, then that feeds the group itself. That kind of grows the group from within.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I love that idea of keeping everybody involved that way. And like you said, even if at the final actual performance, they're not all playing it, why not keep them all involved as they're going? This also brings me up, you might have this on your list of things to talk about, but I remember having a conversation with a percussionist one time who talked about how when she was in high school, the director just handed her all the parts and she got to assign them. So of course she was playing all the great stuff and she was playing most of the top snares or whatever. And, she was aware later that she hadn't really given everybody a chance to have that experience of playing all the good stuff. So I feel like that might be something that directors need to think about, is making sure that everybody gets a chance. And as you said, why not have somebody double, or even let somebody who's not your top player be on that snare drum for the march? You know what I mean? Like it's education. I know we're all obsessed about what we sound like on a performance, especially for an adjudication, but I wonder if you want to talk about sort of a more equal way to distribute the parts.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think if you have a specific leader, somebody who's excelled, and maybe they're your drum captain, your section leader, or whatever, having them help with assigning parts can be great. But I think that's a conversation that should happen along with you, the director, and say, hey, can you come up with a list of who you think should play parts for this song, and then give it back to me. Let's talk about it. Make sure that we're on the same page about that. And if we need to make changes, we can before we hand out those parts, so to make sure that you're both running on the same strip there. I think that's a big important thing to do. Also, with in getting parts distributed equally, we're all guilty. Music teachers are all guilty of pigeonholing kids. We try not to do it. We certainly look for opportunities to, everyone wants the snare drum part, so we try to distribute that best we can. But we also know that you have some kids who are they're just the mallet people. They really love mallets. That's what they got good at initially, or maybe the timpani people or the snare drum people, or whatever the case is. So you want to try to spread that out as much as possible, so you don't feel like when you hand those parts out that it's just one kid coming up and saying, all right, just give me all the timpani parts. Maybe at least for one song, make that timpani person go play a set of bells. And if that's not their forte, then give them an easier bell part to work on and say, hey, this isn't something crazy like Tchaikovsky or something. This is just a few little notes here and there that they can feel is still within their comfort zone. But yet you still, parse them out. A lot of states, when they do auditions for all district and all state band, require a percussionist now to do all 3 major areas. They have to audition on snare drum, mallets, and timpani, and their score is combined from all of that. Now, I know probably not every state does that, but several do. So the more you can spread those parts out to give exposure to all those instruments, the better those kids who are going to go for honor bands are going to do in those auditions too.
Yeah, I think this is a great example of something that you're talking to me about as a percussionist. That's really important. Is everybody needs to get a chance and has a responsibility to try to play everything. And your
Mhm.
idea of doubling up is a great idea here too. On even this, but I think that's another way to keep them busy and engaged is to know that okay, well, you know what, you have to know the snare drum part and the bell part and the timpani part on this, and let's even switch it up during the different rehearsals, and give everybody the chance to play a lot of stuff. Because a lot of times, as you said, on a lot of the music, they're not super busy a lot
Mhm.
during the song. So why not let them learn all the parts? You know what I mean? Like I understand that takes a little bit of extra effort, but let's keep those kids engaged.
Sure. And if you ever need to just focus on that, if you do get a good busy part for them, and maybe you have to have the percussionist in the class, like you might not have the advantage of a separate percussion class, and but you still need to work with them. You can still have them play, and then maybe have the rest of your ensemble just do mouthpieces while you're doing a run of the piece or a section of the piece, but tell the percussion to play as normal so that they become the focus. They can listen to themselves, and even for other people to listen in there who've been so focused on their own part and say, oh, that bell part that's being played, that's doubling what I'm doing. Anywhere you can make connections like that between percussion and the rest of the piece, the less percussionists will feel like, well, we're just over here on the side hitting things for a little while. Percussionists sometimes tend to, they create their own little clique of people. And I think if you want them to really feel like they're a part of the full band and an important part of the full band, then the more you can create connections between what they're playing and what other people in the ensemble are playing. Hey, snare drum, that's the same rhythm the trumpets have. Hey, timpani, you're playing the tuba part along there too. That can make a big deal and get them to see the big picture that they're a part of.
Yeah, I love that. Sort of being aware of their place in the ensemble and letting everybody be more aware of them too. It's
Hmm.
terrific. I love that. It's just exactly what I would expect a percussionist to want me to think about. So I love that you're explaining that all that
Yeah.
way. Okay, good. What else you have?
Um, the only other thing I can really think of is just to remind them that percussionists developing technique is a never-ending process. Um, I'm probably mentioning this because I've had a few percussionists over the years who were really bright, solid players. They learned quickly. They're always looking for the challenge. Sometimes the ego might tend to grow along with that set of skills. And as you remind them, hey, you're good at what you're doing, but there's more to do. There's more to develop and become while you're doing this. How can you improve anything you're doing with your technique, in general, with stamina, with being able to play very steady tempo, which I always tell percussionists is their number one job, is to do steady tempo for the rest of the band. Um, that it's a never ending process. So never think that you've gotten to the top of the totem pole, that you're always reaching for greater heights. And when they ask, okay, well, then what else can I do? That's when you dig into your resources of videos and method books and anything else that will want to push them a little farther so they know they've always got more work to do.
Yeah, I love that. And it's sort of like back, as you've already mentioned, going back to those sort of looking at those models and the students need to realize what's possible. Because I think everybody that I've talked to on any instrument in this series keeps talking about how there's always more, you can always do better. And there's all these amazing examples so that no matter how great you are on your instrument, you realize, oh, wow, there are people that play a lot better and that sound a lot better. And I need to keep working. Like that's part of being a musician. So to your point, let's make sure they know what's possible, and it's not just being able to play that one part that's sitting in front of them.
Right. Yeah. I've been playing percussion now for 43 years, and I still notice all kinds of things that I can continue to work on. Um, Teaching helps to do that. Teaching helps me to understand that there's always more to learn, no matter how experienced you are, no matter where you think your own personal skill set is. Um, there's always something to go back to and say, ooh, I'd really love to smooth out my rolls. I love to get my weaker hand stronger. Um, I would love to be able to play in a more musical way when I play on the timpani, things like that. It's a never ending process for any musician. And it's important that kids realize that early on.
Well, and I think for percussion, there's so much to learn. There are so many instruments and techniques and all, there's so much to it. It seems like that would be easiest to understand, that there's always more to know, because there's so many different things that they do and ways they contribute and instruments they're playing and the latest. I think it's really interesting. I can't imagine getting bored as a percussionist.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you're playing in one song, you're playing the timpani, but the next you're playing the slapstick, and the whatever, like, to bring up Sleigh Ride, but I mean,
Exactly.
or many other pieces. But there is a lot to do and a lot of interesting things to grab and make music with. And I think that's part of it, what's exciting about it.
I totally agree. That's what excited me about percussion, is that I was not sitting down to learn only one instrument, that it's like getting involved in the toy section at the store, of being able to play with all these different things. Every day is a little different when you get to do that. So if you're one of those students that might be inadvertently being pigeonholed because you're really good at snare, and you maybe go up to your band director and say, hey, I would like to try a bell part. I would like to maybe try timpani, or, hey, I wouldn't mind doing an auxiliary part, woodblock triangle, cymbals, those kinds of things too, because they need experience with those things as well. You can walk in and be the best snare drum player on the planet, but if you don't know good suspended cymbal technique, then your audition for the New York Philharmonic will not go very well.
Right, because you want to be a percussionist, not necessarily a drummer, or just a snare drummer. So I think you almost already answered my last question, but I'm going to ask you again anyway and see, and which is, why do you love being a percussionist? Why do you love playing this?
For me, I'd go back to the story of how I started in music. I had a terrific music teacher in elementary school. Her name was Leela Graham in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And she played with the local symphony as well. And so she was able to get the symphony to bring different sections on different weeks of the year and play for the whole school. It was all fascinating to me. But when that percussion section came, I mean, my eyes just got huge. I lit up. I'm like, what is that? What is that? What is that? I just automatically had a million questions about what they were doing. And I thought, this is really what I want to be involved in, because it just piqued my curiosity so much. Much to my mother's chagrin, who had actually asked her, please don't let him play the drums. Don't let him play the drums. Let him play a clarinet or something quiet like that. But then she went back to my mother after we expressed an interest, and she did an initial little test with us to see if we could catch on to things quickly. And she said to my mother, Alice, he really wants to play the drums. And bless my mother for being patient enough to say, okay, let's do that. And then supporting me well enough through that. They saw that I had an affinity for it, and a skill set that developed pretty quickly. And I just loved every single bit of it, because it gives me multiple perspectives on music in general, not just the rhythmic part, but getting to learn the melodic and harmonic parts as well as just playing different textures of things. It got me listening to everything that was going on in the full music, not just in the percussion section. So that has stuck with me this entire time.
I love that. And Danny, since this is the last podcast in this series where I've talked to someone for each instrument, I do want to sort of note that it's been really interesting to me and sort of joyful that every time I've asked someone the question, why do you love playing your instrument? They always go, well, when I first started, or the first time I heard it, like, they all go back to the beginning when that's when they fell in love. And then, of course, the rest of it just grew from there. So I love that that's part of everybody's story. And you certainly said that too. I remember seeing those percussionists for the first time and thinking, how cool is that? I love that that's part of everybody's story of why they love their horn.
Sure. I have so many vivid memories of those early days and how it felt. And I think even as importantly as that, it gave me identity, which is so important when you're in school, especially going into middle school and high school. People began to know me after a while as, oh, there's Danny. He's really good at music. I heard him play with the band, or he did a solo, or he is the drum major or whatever. Became a huge part of my identity that I've carried around for my entire life.
Yeah, I love that. I can say the same thing, and I think everybody would too. You're a musician, or even specifically on your instrument, you're known for being good at that and for loving to do that and being a musician. I think that's great. That's why we love being musicians. Part of it, for sure.
Oh yeah,
Danny, I loved this conversation. Thank you so much for talking with me and sharing this, and I loved the information that you shared. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to do it. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Make sure you watch for all the releases in this series, and we hope you'll subscribe here at YouTube so that you don't miss a single release. Thank you for watching.
Marching Arts Education is the home of the Marching Roundtable podcast. We give you access to the top marching arts professionals through live webinars, podcasts, videos, interviews, and online coursework. With over 1,000 podcasts and hundreds of webinars and videos, there are hours of great professional development for you and your staff. Sign up for a membership to Marching Arts Education to get complete access to all webinars, videos, and podcasts, plus discounts on coursework. Many directors are using professional development funds through their school or boosters to make these resources available to their staff. Imagine what you could do with so many great new ideas from the top professionals in our activity. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for our newsletter to find out about the latest podcasts, webinars, and new content. Find all of this and sign up at marchingartseducation.com.